Stanley Livingston, this is absolutely great to be Zooming with you and into your Los Angeles home.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad to be here.
You know, we are chatting today in part because a very big fan of yours in London, Andy Jones is his name. He said, please, can we chat to Stanley Livingston? He is an enormous fan.
Hey,
so here we are. You see, dreams do come true sometimes.
Well, how you doing, Andy, there in London? I wish I was in London. Be a little cooler than I'm sure it is in California.
You know, Stan, if my abacus is right, you've been in showbiz now 68 years.
Yeah, just about right. Started when I was 5 years old, so I've been doing this a little while.
In the Water Babies, is that right? You were kind of like in a troop of kids who were swimming and doing stuff in the water.
Well, that's how I segued into the industry. My mom wanted me to learn how to swim at a very young age. I had a cousin that I never knew because he drowned a couple of years before I was born, and my mom wanted to make damn sure I didn't drown. Yeah, I took swimming lessons, and we were at that pool almost every day, and it became a pretty popular place to go. The lady that owned it was very publicity minded. She got period magazines to come out and shoot these photo spreads on what were called water babies, which was us. And she had a porthole cut in the side of her pool, and it was about a 4-foot huge piece of glass, and photographers could go down there and you could look underwater and you would see these kids riding cars, bikes. We were on swings, but we also were out of the water high diving. And because of it, it kind of garnered a lot of publicity, and a lot of Hollywood type people started bringing their kids there to learn how to swim. Agents, managers, directors, producers, and there was an agent there, I guess, when I was about 5 years old. And I was pretty extroverted, and I was blonde and cute, and I guess she thought I had the right qualities to make a child actor. So she talked my mom into sending me out. And, like most actors, I started out as an extra. Would go out on when they would ever need neighborhood kids on some show, and I would be one of those. And I guess I did that for about 6 months. And one of the shows that I was an extra on was called The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet.
Yes.
I had no lines, but for whatever reason, Ozzie was shot at a couple times. I don't know why he singled me out. He goes, come here. And I went over and he said, could you say this line? And he told me what to say. And well, yeah. So he says, here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to put an X on the floor right there. And you come out, and that's where you're going to stop and look directly at me, say that line. But I don't want you to look down at the piece of tape. You just stay looking at me, say the line, and go that way. So we did it. And, I got it right the first time. We shot it a couple more times. And then he moved the camera closer. And I guess I figured out I was getting a close up. And at the end of the day, he went over to my mom and said, hey, listen, I'd like to have him back again. Can you please leave your contact information or your agent's contact information with the secretary in the front office? And we did. I'm never thinking we'd hear from him again. I mean, how many times in show business have you heard, oh, we have to work together. I'll see you again.
Yes.
And about 2-3 months later, the agent called and said, hey, the Nelson family called. They want you to do another show. And this time you have more lines. So I went back and did that. And it turned into a semi-regular gig. And then as I started rolling along, I started getting other TV work, other period TV shows back then, and some movies to boot, too. I was in a movie called The Bonnie Parker Story, which was an early Bonnie and Clyde feature film with Dorothy Provine. Later, I got Rally Round the Flag Boys with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. I was one of two brothers on that movie. And in fact, it's funny, Barry, my brother, who was also Ernie on My Three Sons, was hired on Rally Round the Flag. And he only made it to 12 o'clock. He had an eye problem and they didn't know it. It was undiagnosed. But when the director was having him look straight at the TV, it looked like he was looking over here. Yeah. And so they sent him to an ophthalmologist. And by 1 o'clock, I had a new brother. They didn't want a kid wearing glasses or a kid with cross eyes. How the heck is Paul Newman going to have a kid with cross eyes? That wouldn't work out.
But let me just take you back to Ozzie and Harriet, Stan, because, I mean, you think about that. You think about Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, absolute legends. I mean, this was one of the most watched shows back in the day. In America, and of course, Ricky Nelson, who became this teen idol turned singing sensation. What are your memories of working with Ozzie and Harriet? How did they treat you? Were they lovely? Were they warm? Was it really like a family?
It really was like a family. And, you know, if there was any strife between them, it was definitely kept under wraps. I never saw them yelling at each other or any kind of situation. And they were just, Ozzie really knew how to work with kids. I mean, you know, part of it was just his kindness and his gentleness working with children, but he also knew how to bribe us really well. There was always ice cream around. And if you did a good job, he made sure you got lots of ice cream. So, yeah, that turned out to be such a funny thing that there was actually an episode written where we were all eating ice cream in the scene at a table. In fact, Barry was in that too. That was my last job on Ozzie and Harriet, and Barry's first. And when I left, I couldn't do Ozzie and Harriet anymore because I'd been hired to do My Three Sons. And in those days, if you were on a series, you couldn't work in another series. So I had to tell Ozzie goodbye, which kind of broke my heart.
So to rally around the Flag Boys, you referenced that. What are your memories of working with Paul Newman and the great Joanne Woodward?
Yeah, I just remember them being, you know, very nice people, probably not too much different than Ozzie and Harriet, because by that point they were married in real life and, you know, had kids. So they certainly knew how to, you know, deal with kid actors. I remember, you know, Paul coming over and introducing himself, and not like an adult standing up, but kind of dropping down to our level. So, you know, I think that's a secret that all adult actors go through when they're playing parents in film. You got to get to know the kid. You just can't walk up to a kid, you know, 2 minutes before a scene and go, "I'm your dad, nice to meet you," and I'm going to just yell some lines at you. They were smart enough to know to try and break that wall. And at that age, it wasn't hard to do. You know, I had no idea who the hell Paul Newman was. He was just an adult in the scene as far as I knew. You know, in fact, I remember he said, "I'm going to have to yell at you," but I don't really mean it. It's just, you know, because we're doing a scene and that's what the scene requires. But, you know, if I get a little loud, don't be startled. It's okay. You know, we're good friends. And, you know, he knew to preface it that way. You know, one of the things that's interesting to me, and more in retrospect, was I got to work with Leo McCarey as the director. I don't know if you know who he is. He's the guy that put the Laurel and Hardy together.
Yes.
You know, so he was a huge force in the industry at that time. And again, he was a really nice guy, in spite of him, you know, yelling at my brother. I don't think he quite understood what was going on, or you could have an eye looking over here and, you know, still be looking at a TV set, but it looks like you're looking over there. And it's frustrating, you know, just if you can get anything shot and it comes out good and you got your shots before noon, you're doing good if you're the director. Hey.
Am I right in remembering, Stan, that Joan Collins was also in Rally Round the Flag Boys?
Introducing Joan Collins. Yeah, I believe that was her first film, her first American film anyway. Yeah, she was a smasher to look at. I didn't work with her, but I saw her around the set, and, you know, I guess my 5-year-old hormones were raging.
Now, you mentioned the Bonnie Parker story, of course. Now, that was kind of the forerunner to the Bonnie and Clyde movie classic with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. You realize that movie is one of Quentin Tarantino's favorites, the Bonnie Parker story?
He has interesting taste, and he does seem to like films from, you know, different eras. Well, that movie was made actually by AIP, so I guess Roger Corman somehow had his finger in the making of it, you know, although I don't think he directed it. But it was made to pair off with another film. It was being made for the drive-in theaters in the United States. The other feature that it was billed with was called Machine Gun Kelly with Charles Bronson.
Oh,
And I remember my parents took me to see the movie so I could see myself on the big screen. This was the first time. We got to the theater kind of late. I think it was like a 9 o'clock showing, and we walked in and I was like, oh no, because Machine Gun Kelly was on first. So there went 70 minutes or an hour and a half. And by the time our film came about, I was fast asleep. I never saw it. I didn't see it until about 20 years later. There were DVD players in those days, so unless you caught it in the theater, you didn't see anything.
Amazing bit of trivia as a kid. Speaking of which, is this true that you played stunt double for John Provost on Lassie?
I did. That was one of my earliest things that I did. This was before I was actually an actor and still working as an extra. And this came about because in the transitional episode where the original, what was the character, Jeff was leaving and Timmy was coming on the show,
Yeah.
somehow Timmy didn't like being in the country or something. And so, yeah, he runs away and somehow falls into a lake and is out there splashing around. Lassie's looking for him, can hear him, is going to go out and save him. Well, that wasn't John. John didn't know how to swim. That was me. It's funny when we got around to shooting it, it was actually in a lake or a pond or something. And I remember they said, well, go out, keep going out, keep going out. So I swam out and I go, okay. And they're like, yeah, right there. What I didn't know is at the bottom of that pond, there was about 2 feet of goop. It was like goopy mud. And I went into it and I got stuck in it. I was like, I don't think I can get out of this. I'm pushing, and I'm running out of air. And finally I got loose and came back up. So I took a big gulp of air and water. And by that point, the guy who was playing the dad, I think, had made it from the shore out to where I was and picked me up. And then my other directorial gig that I had to do was don't look at the camera. Keep looking away from the camera. No matter which way he turns you, you turn your face that way. So it was scary. You know, I'm going, man, I don't know if I do that again.
You know, Stan, you were a real scene stealer in a wonderful movie called Please Don't Eat the Daisies with two legends, Doris Day and the great David Niven. What are your memories of working on that movie? Because even these decades on, it is still such a favorite.
Yeah, it really is. Well, you know, obviously I remember working with Doris Day. And again, she was smart enough to know I got kids in here. And she made sure she got to know us, meaning me, Charlie Herbert, and Flip Mark, who were my two brothers on the show. Yeah, she was smart. I remember, you know, when we first came out, she brought a horseshoe set. We played horseshoes. And then another day, she's like, hey, do you guys like playing cards? And, you know, we sort of did, but she had some card games she wanted to teach us. So we learned to do that and played cards with her and went to lunch with her so she could talk to us. And you know, I think it showed itself on screen that, you know, it just wasn't, you know, some kids on the set, but people she had bonded with. And, you know, we had a rapport and she treated us really well. I mean, and same thing with David Niven. He was a little more aloof and I don't think he was into kids, but, you know, he seemed to be a nice guy. It's interesting how I kind of left part of the equation out about how I got Please Don't Eat the Daisies. When I was doing Ozzie and Harriet, right across from Ozzie and Harriet, there was another stage, and every noon the stage door would open, and you know, crew go in and out and just hang out and get some sunlight in and out. But there was a dog there, and I was dog crazy when I was a kid, and it was a basset hound. So I'd go over and play with that, and the trainer again was, you know, go, how do you do the hand signals? And this guy came up to me, looked kind of like an executive in a suit, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm probably gonna try. And he wanted to know who I was and what I was doing there, and I stood up, shook his hand, and I said, my name's Stanley Livingston, and no wisecracks, please. So he cracked up when I told him that. And then he stood there and kept talking to me and kept talking to me. And like about 15 minutes went by, and I'm like, gosh, what the heck is this guy doing? You know, I want to get out of here. And so finally he goes, is your mom around? I'd like to meet your mom. And I remember saying to him, well, am I in trouble? And he goes, no, son, you're not in trouble, but I would like to meet your mom. So I said, well, okay. So, and he stood there and talked to my mom. It was probably like 20, 30 minutes or something. And anyway, found out about 3 months later, that same guy had written a TV pilot for me and to star in. And the guy was Jackie Cooper. I didn't know that. So when he was a kid, he starred in a movie called Skippy.
Yes.
And in December of 1958, we shot this TV pilot called Skippy. It became a showpiece for me. That's how I got Please Don't Eat the Daisies. And then about a year later, there was a casting call for a kid to be in a new series, which was going to have 3 brothers in it. And they were looking for somebody to play the youngest son. And I guess I got suggested. That reel was taken over to Desilu Studios, and they gave it to the producers. And the next day I got hired to play Chip on My 3 Sons. So
was that a lovely show to work on? It just seemed so from the outside, from a viewer's perspective. It really did seem like a family.
It really was. The show was created for Fred. In fact, I should probably tell you, it almost wasn't going to be My 3 Sons. The show's creator, Don Feddersen, had a show in mind to be called My 3 Daughters. And he also produced the Lawrence Welk Show, and he had, I believe it was the McGuire sisters on that show, or it was the
Yes.
Lennon sisters, like whatever one has three, one has four. And he was in negotiations with Eddie Albert to play the dad, and they didn't want to leave Lawrence Welk. I think what happened was Don went to see the Shaggy Dog and thought, well, wait a minute, this is a better idea. And what if I could get that guy, Fred MacMurray, to be the dad in this? Shaggy Dog was exactly My Three Sons without Bub. So anyway, yeah, it came about. Fred agreed to do it. I think he was looking for a different kind of situation. He and his wife, June Haver, adopted twins. He didn't want to go on the road for 6 months at a pop and come home and see his kids, growing up without him, and agreed to do the daily grind of a TV series, which was unheard of because he was the highest paid actor in Hollywood in 1960. He would work for about 2 months and then go away for the summer for 3 months and then come back and work for another 3-4 months at the end. And we'd shoot all the stuff that we hadn't shot with him.
You're right, Stan, in as much as he was, without doubt, an absolutely enormous movie star. Think of Double Indemnity, of course, with Barbara Stanwyck and Alice Adams, with Katharine Hepburn, and there was a Joan Crawford movie in the mix, Above Suspicion. I think he was one of those first major movie stars to make that leap into that territory of television, which back then for a movie star to be part of was considered something you just didn't do.
Yeah, most of the people that did it, somebody like maybe Robert Young, who had an impressive movie career, but it's how it works in the movie. 1 minute you're going up, next minute you're sliding down. As soon as you hit that slide down, that's when the TV producers start calling, hey, how would you like to do a TV series? And it's how a lot of people segued into the industry. But CBS handled Fred, back then it was ABC, handled him with kid gloves, and the show was handled with kid gloves because they just couldn't believe they had a movie star of his caliber to be on a TV series. For younger people.
What was he like to work with, Stan? What was the great Fred MacMurray like to work with?
Very low key. By then I'd worked enough to know that, it's a high pressure world and some of the actors are under strain and they blow up and start yelling at people, or the director yells at people, or producer comes down on the set and is yelling at people. Our set never had any of that. And it's not that Fred didn't care about the material. And if there was a problem with it, which there always would be a couple times a week, he would quietly go over to the director or the producer or the assistant director and say, hey, look, we need to work through the scene. This dialogue doesn't make any sense. But there was no yelling or screaming. And sometimes they would have us come over there just to throw in our 2 cents worth if they thought, the dialogue didn't really work. But yeah, Fred, he threw his weight around, but it was very, it wasn't in a bad way. It was just really only to improve things. It was never just to go berserk. He's a guy that drove to work, not in a limousine, not in a Ferrari, not in a Mercedes, man. He had a Pontiac station wagon. Well, in the beginning, it was a Chevy station wagon. And then you see him getting out of the car and he'd be carrying his lunch, which was made for him by his wife, June Haver, put into a brown paper bag. And, you go into his trailer in between scenes, and at lunchtime, occasionally we go over and knock on his door and go, hey, do you want to go with us to the commissary? Yeah, once in a while he'd go, but he was, I don't want to say he was shy. I think he just, liked being by himself. God knows what he was doing there. He was a fisherman, so he was probably tying flies so he could go, fishing later. He only did my 3 cents to support his fly fishing habit.
Now, as I understand it, Fred MacMurray was one of the great saxophone players, and rumours have long run around that he actually plays sax in that fabulous toe-tapping theme of My Three Sons. Da 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 da. Is that true?
Yeah, that kind of all started, I think, about the time the Beatles came around. On the set, Don Grady was always playing music from day one. He had a guitar up there. He had an electric piano. And I saw the Beatles and, I wanted to be one. So I went out and bought a guitar. And then somebody saw it. And it was like whatever we were doing somehow would end up being turned into a TV episode. So they wrote a show where we had a family band and Barry and I had guitars. I think it was about the time Uncle Charlie came around. And he had a cello and Fred had his sax. So
Don Grady, of course, you referenced, he was Mike, passed away, I think, 2012, cancer, only 68. Were you guys great friends long after the show finished?
Long after, yeah, he was like a brother to me,
Mm.
especially when I was younger. He was a great guy to hang out with. And like I said, he was, treated us like younger brothers and, yeah, had time for us. We wanted to learn guitar, and he was certainly a qualified musician. He played every single instrument, so he
Yes.
knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were just learning that. But yeah, we'd get together and do things, or we get sent out on publicity things together. Occasionally, we go to his house. It'd be, yeah, it's kind of fun. The other guy was the guy that played the original older brother, Tim Considine. I
Yes.
was probably closer to Tim than I was even to Don. Yeah,
Yes.
Don was really great with both Barry and I. He'd pick us up and we go to his mom's house in Beverly Hills and go swimming on a Saturday all day, or he'd take us to a movie or go to a hot rod event because he was totally into cars. But yeah, they were both really just great
Yeah.
guys. And yeah, Tim just passed away last year.
I'm thinking about Don Grady again too, because if I'm remembering correctly, he had this real life romance with his co-star Tina Cole, and I think they nearly got married at one point, didn't they?
Yeah, it was kind of a on again, off again thing, but she was married when she came to the show. And I
Yes.
don't even think that Don really wanted her to be his wife on the show. He knew Ronnie Troop and wanted her to play Katie.
Yes.
And I don't know why it didn't work out, but they wanted Tina, and she was brought in, became Katie. And very quickly, there were sparks flying, and everybody's scratching their head, going, "Hey, what's going on here?" But she was married to Volney Howard at that time, and broke up their relationship. She ended up
Yes.
getting divorced, and then they became an item. And it was right at the end of the series. Well, Don didn't come back for the last year. He left the show at the end of the 11th season. And I believe she wanted to get married. Yeah, no, he wanted to get married. And I
Mm.
guess because she had just gotten out of this marriage with Volney, she didn't want to get married. And they kept dating, but then it broke them up. And it wasn't until, I guess it was about 4 years, 5 years later, we did that uh, Partridge Family atrocity with the Partridge Family. Don and Tina hadn't seen each other in about 2 or 3 years, and got back. And by now, Don was married and Tina was still available.
Oh, wow.
And sparks started flying again. And, I talked to Don. He's going, "Well, I guess I'm getting divorced. Tina and I are getting back together." And that lasted for about a year, and that was it. They both just kind of walked away. And, yeah, we were all sad to see that. We obviously liked both of them and always thought they would get together. And
Yes.
then the funny part is the girl that Don wanted for his wife on My Three Sons was Ronnie Troop. Guess whose wife she became? My wife. She played Polly.
Oh, that's right.
So
Yes. Wow.
yeah, yeah,
God,
yeah.
you need a
Ronnie.
whiteboard and a cut lunch to follow all of this, don't you, Stanley? You need to map it all out. Take a
Well, had the
cut
show
lunch.
lasted another year, they would have probably had Ernie getting married, and I think there was plans for the dog to get married the year after that. So everybody was getting married on this show,
And of
and in
course,
spite of nobody wanting to be there anymore, I almost didn't come back for the 11th season either. I had an offer from the Virginian, and
right.
they wanted to write a character, and they approached my agent and said, "Would he be interested in doing that? We know he's not, he's out of his contract with My Three Sons." I was like, wow, maybe that's a good idea. I'd be seeing another way as an adult, not Chip Douglas, this perennial 18-year-old character, even though I was, going on 23. And I'm going, yeah, that sounds like, and I always liked horses. That's the whole reason I got into show business. I thought I was going to be a cowboy on TV. So when push came to shove, I kept thinking about it, what to do, because I had to give them an answer, and I couldn't walk away from Sons. I just thought, I can't jump ship. I'll
Yeah.
go down with the ship. So I turned it down and came back for the last year. And the irony is, if I'd even gone over to Virginian, that was the last year of the Virginian anyway. So
Your brother Barry Livingston
mhm.
came in as the adopted brother, and you'd worked with him before, of course. What was it like working with him in that sustained fashion?
It was great. Well, he actually was on the show a lot before he became a Son. It was around
Yes.
the time he went over to Ozzie and Harriet. but he started doing movies, so he wasn't an unknown quantity to them. I mean, he just got through doing Papa's Delicate Condition with Jackie Gleason. He
Yes.
did
Right.
My Six Loves with Debbie Reynolds and David Jansen and Cliff Robertson, and he kind
Ah,
of
yeah.
stole the show. He was this very cute character, but he was in The Errand Boy too. That was also a Paramount. That was around the time he met Elvis, who had this limousine with probably the first TV in the back, and Barry was just totally entranced with that, and Elvis gave him a ride around the studio in it, so it was
Yes.
kind of cool. But Barry was working. The kid who played my friend on My Three Sons was an actor named Ricky Allen, and Ricky was into playing ice hockey and got me into it. And then when we were supposed to come back, I think it was the third year, right before he started shooting, he was in the couple of the first episodes. He got his front teeth knocked out by a hockey stick, and they didn't bring him back, and they were looking for another kid. And by then, obviously, they knew Barry, and Barry now had amassed some credits, was semi-regular on Ozzie and Harriet, and they gave him a chance to become Ernie on the show. And for about 2 years, he was in, neighborhood kid and a lot of classroom scenes. But I was happy to have my brother there because, I was alone. Growing up on a sound stage till my brother came along, intermittently we'd have kids work, but I was happy to have anybody my age. I was in prison in a sound stage for about 8-10 hours a day with grown-ups, and a lot of them 60 plus. So to have my brother there was cool. I had somebody to, play ball with, to ride bikes with, and we were into guitars together. And then Tim, fifth year, announced he wasn't coming back, and the show was called My Three Sons, and we needed a son in a hurry. And somebody went, well, what about this guy? We'll just concoct something, say he's a foster kid, and the Douglas family takes him in.
Some amazing trivia, Stanley. During the show's 12-year run, there were actually 4 sons and 1 daughter. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, there was 4 because Tim was on the show, and actually Tim was on the same time Barry was, although he was just a friend then. But you could say, yeah, there were 4 sons. As the show progressed, things evolved, and Robbie got married. They decided he should get married, and next year they decided he should have kids. Turned out to be more than 1. It was triplets. And they decided to kind of rerun that scenario the following year, and I guess they thought, well, Fred MacMurray should have somebody. If Don Grady can have somebody. So Fred had worked with Beverly Garland before, and she was brought in, and somehow they were introduced and clicked, and they had a romance. And the thing that was different is she already had a little girl. She was a widower too. So that's how we got that little girl in there, Dodie.
And tell me, how is Dawn Lynn doing? Because, I mean, she was wonderful as Dodie Douglas, but gee whiz, she's had a real tough trot in recent times, hasn't she? The brain tumor, and her health has been up and down, and GoFundMes have been set up to try and help her get through vast medical bills. How's she doing, Stan?
I just talked to her husband a couple days ago, and she's doing much better. She was doing well, got out of the hospital, came home, and it only lasted about a month, and she had some kind of, I don't know if it was a seizure or what, but she had to go back into the hospital. I believe she was in a coma for a while, and then ended up with a very extended stay in the hospital. And then started to progress. And then it looked like she was doing pretty good. This was a couple months ago. I called and spoke to her, to John, that's her husband. He was there, and he held the phone up to her ear so I could talk to her. And he said, she's smiling, she knows who you are. And she's blinking. And anyway, so I thought she's doing better. Then she had a relapse again and came home, and I think she had basically given up hope. But a couple of weeks ago, she snapped out of it again. And I talked to John just a couple of days ago and said, hey, she's actually saying words. She can actually like take a spoon and feed herself some Jello. But I mean, she's still in a hospital type situation and getting therapy and rehabilitation. So I'm just hoping she's strong enough to pull through this, as are her many fans and My Three Son fans. She doesn't deserve it. She's only 59. It's complete BS, man.
It's terrible. Of course, she is the sister of of Leif Garrett, one of the great pop stars. Now, speaking of greats, William Frawley was such a wonderful Hollywood character actor. And of course, for fans of I Love Lucy, he was Fred Mertz to Vivian Vance's Ethel Mertz, but he was Uncle Bub on My Three Sons. Now, I heard these rumors that he actually loved a drink or three. And sometimes at lunch, it was damn near impossible to get him away from lunch, which was usually a liquid lunch, back onto the soundstage. Is that right?
It was an issue for everybody else but me, because I was the only person he would listen to. Bill, when he came on the show, I found out he was coming on the show, and I already knew him from I Love Lucy, and he was my favorite character. And so the thought that I'm going to be working with this guy. So I remember when it first started, I didn't know either of my grandfathers in real life. They had all passed away by the time I was born, actually. And so I thought, I'm going to make this guy my grandfather. He's old enough to be my grandfather, and he looked like a grandfather. And, I set out to charm him, and I did. And, we became fast friends, both on the set and off. And, I just loved hanging out with him and telling stories and singing songs and playing cards. And when nobody's looking, smoking a cigar or two, even though I was only about 11. And then going to lunch. And after a couple of years, Bill would go to lunch, and he would order food, but he never ate it. But he would order a drink and kind of nurse that drink all the way through. And he was worried somebody be looking at him, because he was under strict, strict rules. You can't have more than one drink at lunch. But he wouldn't get up and leave. So we would break from 12 to 1 generally. We'd go to a restaurant that was on the street behind the studio called Nicodell's. And he would have his liquid lunch. In fact, every day he bought me a drink and would be put in front of me. And I had a guardian there with me. And I remember I'd look up and she'd be like that. And so I'd have to take my drink and pour it under the table when he wasn't looking. But he didn't want to leave. So, when people come over from the studio a little bit panicky and go, Bill, you gotta get up. He told me, go after yourself, and he wouldn't get up. And so they finally came to me and said, look, you're the only one he'll listen to, please. At I think it was 12:45, you have to get him up and start walking him back, because it's going to take him 15 minutes to get back to the sound stage. You got to do this. You got to. So it became my unofficial job. And then, my guardian knew about it. So, she would go like that, meaning I tell Bill, okay, Bill, we got to go back to work. Okay, kid, and he would just immediately get up, and I'd lead him back to around the corner, down the block, into the studio lot and over to the stage door. And he seemed to be okay with that. And that's the way we did it. And, I loved every minute, him being on the set and him pulling pranks on Vivian Vance. Barry and I, one time in this prank, were right across from the sound stage, stage 11. There was the editorial building, and there was a dumpster out there with a lot of film tins in it, and they were empty. And so he had us fish out about 10 or 20 of these big film tins. And these things really make a racket. If you drop it, it sounds like cymbals clashing. So we put them in a box, and then we went over to the Lucy show set where Vivian Vance was now working, and we brought these in, and we're standing there with Bill and go, what are we doing? And he's going, you're going to dump those out, but don't dump them until I tell you to. So I was like, okay. So we were waiting. We could hear voices they were rehearsing. As soon as he heard Vivian Vance's voice, we picked up the box and dumped it through it. And all the film tins started rolling down towards where they were rehearsing and crashing into each other. And how when round things kind of just go whoa, 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 like that. And it sounded like cymbals. And so we heard this voice coming from the set. Bill! She knew it was him. And he goes, run! So we'd run out of there. And stuff like that went on all the time.
There was talk that, and I'm sure that the fabulous William Frawley would have told you, that he and Vivian Vance didn't get on all that well.
Yeah, I think that there was an issue, because apparently Vivian didn't like the idea of her husband being so much older.
That's right.
She's like, you're like my father, and he took umbrage to that, and that's when the profanity started right about then, and called her some choice names, and that kind of went on. But after a while, when I look back on it, as it was happening, because they would run into each other coming out of we shared a stage door with them. There was an outer room, the both stage doors opened into, and occasionally they would run right into each other, and he would, start calling her name. But if they saw people around, they would do it. And then I realized later when I was older, they didn't dislike each other at all. In fact, they relished in the idea this was like performance art,
Yes.
the creative profanity that they would come up with for each other. And I really don't buy the story that they hated each other. I mean, there may have been a moment when it was contentious originally on I Love Lucy, but I think they were only too happy to please any onlookers.
William Frawley left, as I understand it, because of his ailing health. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't his idea to leave. He just really was of the age, he was up there. I mean, I hate to tell you this. See this face here?
Yeah.
I'm the same age as Bub, William Frawley was when My Three Sons started.
Yeah.
So if we were shooting it out, I'd be Bub.
Yeah.
But yeah, he apparently had a heart problem, and
Yes.
it was getting worse and worse. And by the 5th year, everybody had to go get an insurance physical every year. And apparently the doctor couldn't hear his heart at all and said, I can't sign off on this to the insurance company. And because of the way we shot with that MacMurray method, we were shooting in 12, 15 shows and little pieces every day. So he could have been in all 15 of those shows, had a problem or dropped dead, and they'd have to shoot all that over. We didn't shoot like everybody else. We'd take one show and you shoot it out. You go to the next show, shoot it out. Had they done that, Bill would have been able to stay on the show. And the doctor wouldn't sign off on, and they couldn't get insurance because it would have required it. And sure enough, about 4 months later, Bill did pass away.
And he was replaced by another William Demarest, who played Uncle Charlie.
There was actually an actor, because Bill Demarest wasn't available immediately. And we had, I think, 1 or 2 episodes with James Gregory playing an O'Casey, and he came in and he was just there temporarily, but he was always that kind of acerbic, growly kind of character anyway. And then Bill Demarest came and took over the role, but not as Bub, as his brother, Uncle Charlie.
Yes.
And he's another great guy. I mean, when Bill died, I was only 14, 15, and I was kind of pissed that they didn't bring him back. I didn't understand it from the business point of view. And then, I didn't really warm up to Bill Demarest. Took probably about 6 months to a year before I, finally realized he's just as good and just as nice a person.
Your brother wrote a memoir, The Importance of Being Ernie. He was very candid about going a little bit off the rails and dabbled in drugs just for a moment and so forth. Did any of that happen to you? Did you wind up with that so-called curse of the child star thing happening, Stan, or not?
Sometimes the child thing happens to you.
Yes.
I had such a completely different life than Barry did from the time I was 18 to the time I was about 26. I was probably more of a bad boy after that. When I was 18, I met the girl who I thought was the love of my life, got married, had a kid. I was going to college 4 nights a week, learning my lines, doing homework, and then in the daytime shooting on the set from 6, 7 in the morning till 6 at night. Did that, and then, like I said, 4 nights a week. So I really couldn't partake as much drugs as all my friends. We just got out of high school and you want to have fun and cut loose. And all my friends are going to clubs every night. I couldn't. I worked. I had a kid, I had a family, so responsibility, I think, became my middle name.
Yes.
It wasn't until I got divorced when I was, I guess, 26 that, was single again. And then I kind of partook of, this is LA and drugs were everywhere. So I never really got into it too much. I always was busy. I had started a production company by then. And, I just didn't want anybody to see me inebriated or stoned. I just thought it was, a bad image if you're asking people for money to shoot product. And so, I either had to hide it as best I could or not do it at all so that I had some credibility for what else I was trying to do. Very fortunate. He went on as an actor, so but as an actor, you don't work every day. You work maybe once a week, once a month. So the time in between, you can do whatever you want.
You can muck up. You, however, have carved out a stellar career for yourself. I mean, there was the acting thing, of course, but away from that, as a writer, as a director, as an editor, you've kind of done it all, and in such a successful way that's seen you working constantly.
Yeah, well, part of it was out of self-preservation. I think when I was about 17, I mean, I wanted to continue as an actor, but at the same time, I was like, the other side of this is I'm really bored with it. Is this really what I'm going to do for the next 50 years? Is wait for the phone to ring, go on an interview, try to get a part, memorize your lines. And I thought, I want some more control over this. And I just got interested in behind the scenes stuff.
You've also created something that is hugely useful to a lot of people who are aspiring to be an actor, or in fact, even those who are an actor but just want to continue in some fruitful fashion. It's a DVD set called The Actor's Journey, which is then going to become an online hub.
I had the idea to create this program with what I thought were the business aspects of it. And it's not just get a reel, get a resume, get a headshot, try and get in Screen Actors Guild, try to get an agent. I mean, those are some of the things you do. But I had about 65 things that I thought comprised the industry that we teach actors. And I didn't want it to be me teaching it because, I could do that. But I thought, gee, if I can get a bunch of people to do this, it'd have a lot more credibility. So I contacted people that I worked with, my peers, coworkers, whatever, and said, hey, look, I want to do this project. And if you can, some of them helped me put it together. I had some really incredible people helping me in the beginning, and then we kind of formalized it and then went out to try to shoot it. But I put 100 people together, actors, of course, and directors, producer, executive producers, showrunners, agents, managers, talent agents, just about every way you could look at an actor. We even have the president of the Screen Actors Guild. We have the president of the DGA. So these are the people that are teaching this program. And over 50 of them had either been nominated for or had won Academy, Emmy, Golden Globe Awards. So you're not learning from your, college teacher. You're learning from people who've been in the industry 20, 30 years and, who are, highly acclaimed actors or whatever their position is. And the industry looks up to these people. So you learn the industry, the business side from these people. So we took the entire program, it's 10 hours long. It was broken up originally into 8 volumes that were about an hour and a half each. And so that's going to be available. You can buy the whole program. Or what's cool about this is we're also have it available as the volume. So, if you're not well-heeled and you have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time, you can go through the program one volume at a time. And then we thought, well, why don't we just keep going from there? There were 65 segments that comprised the 8 volumes and the entirety of it, and have those available too. So, they're like whatever, $3 to $5 each. So you can just come back when you're interested and go through the program that way too. So we've kind of covered, I think, all the bases of getting it out to actors who aren't necessarily the most well-heeled people in the world. And, we want to get this information out in a big way,
Before we go, Stanley, I noted an absolute guilty pleasure in your vast filmography. It is a wonderful movie called Attack of the 60-Foot Centerfold. Now, that surely must have been great fun to work on.
It was, it's tongue-in-cheek, sci-fi. And I got to work with a friend of mine, the guy that was the writer and director. Well, I think he was the director on it. I don't think he wrote it. A guy named Fred Ray. I don't know if you know who he is. He's king of the B movies. I think, man, he has directed something like 200 films. It's unbelievable. Anyway, he called me and, he said, hey, I'm doing this thing and I'm trying to populate it with some people that were, on TV. And I'm like, well, I'm not really an actor anymore. But so I said, well, yeah, maybe it'd be fun. And then we brought Kirk in on it. Yeah. Russ Tamblyn was in it. So it was a hoot. Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing it and, got to pal around with my buddies for a couple nights. And had a great time. And
I got to ask you about Tommy Kirk, because he was in that movie, one of the great Disney stars, Old Yeller and things like that. And he died a couple of years ago. And Stan, I was just so sad when you read through his backstory, that he was gay. He'd admitted all of that, but couldn't really live his life for so many years because of that, and fearing it would ruin his life, and then was fired by Walt Disney. And, you look at that and those great talents, and then when you hear they died, you think, oh, I hadn't heard of them in years. And then when you realize what they have gone through in their life and their journey, it sometimes is really very sad, isn't it?
he was just born too soon. You had that happen now, it wouldn't even be a blip on the radar.
Not a thing.
That's the crazy
Not
part.
a thing.
But yeah, I knew Tommy from the time I was about 8 years old, through Tim Considine. They were friends. And I knew what happened to him. And, if you're in Hollywood, you're going to know a lot of gay people. So if you don't like that, don't come to this business.
Yeah.
But, he was a good friend. And, he used to come to parties at my house. I remember the first time I invited him, and he's like, oh, I don't know if I should come. He goes, well, I'm gay. And I go, hey, I got a gay brother. I don't care, man. I just like you. So whatever. And so, he started coming because I had other people, friends of mine, that were gay there. So I said, you'll have some other people to talk to, but I want you to be there, socialize. You never get out. So he started coming, and then I think I was the one that called him about being in the Attack of the 60-Foot Centerfold. I told Fred, I know him. Why don't we get him to be in it? I love this guy. And if his career hadn't taken that turn, which, God, I love Walt Disney too, but that was a terrible, terrible thing to do to somebody. That guy, I think, might have preempted Steve McQueen. I always thought he was the best child actor, best teen actor.
Right.
He was just miles beyond everybody else. And had he matured into a young adult actor and got out of the clutches of that Disney studio thing, it's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking.
Yeah, really, really sad. But you have a big heart. You're a fabulous person. I really loved this chat, Stanley, so much. An incredible career, and might I say, it continues. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time with us. And, of course, big thanks to your great fan, Andy Jones in London, for bringing it like this.